Hi, this is an ordinary voice of spiritual ventriloquism. You are listening to Dummy himself. An interesting conversation I've had today on Facebook in reference to the subject of women and property ownership. There seems to be a disconnect amongst Christians as well as some Hebrews to the effect that, or Messianics or whatever, but that there is some unwritten code that women cannot own property or have rights to property or disbursement to property. This is utterly ridiculous. And anyone that would even come to such a ridiculous conclusion could only be speaking out of past hurt or their experience in their past culture, whatever it may be. And they're attempting to superimpose their experience in their past culture upon the culture of the Bible. Oh, don't worry, we do the same thing with European culture. We want to impose European culture on the Bible too. Everybody wants to impose their own thoughts, their own customs, their own culture, their own traditions, and their own beliefs upon the Word of Yah. And this is absolute error. Okay. Property ownership. It is so ridiculous. I will give you just a few scriptural examples. You go back and you search out the matter. The book of Genesis. I'm not going to give you the chapter. Search it out for yourself. Abraham is given his wife's slave girl, Hagar, by his wife, Sarah. Hagar was Sarah's slave, not Abraham. Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham for a wife, and then later on had issues with it. Amazing. Even after this slave girl became Abraham's wife, she was still the property and possession of her mistress, Sarah. So how is it that women can't own property in the Bible or to exercise power of disbursement and whatnot? It just doesn't make any sense to me. The second example that I will give is Numbers 27. Numbers 27 Numbers 27 is a classic example. The daughters of Zelophehad, I believe it was 5 daughters. One of them's same name as my daughter, Tirzah. They came to Moses because there was no male heir in the family. And as they were to come into the possession, and as allocations were about to be made as far as tribal inheritance in sharing and the parceling of the land amongst the families, these daughters felt like they were being left out. The case was taken before Moses. Now we got women that have legal rights to petition the Sanhedrin, to petition the ecclesiastical and civil authorities for redress. Honestly, whether your culture was out of Islam or some other perverted patriarchal culture, you should not try to, use that as a case against right ruling because someone didn't rule rightly. So they were given, the case was taken up before the Most High by Moses, and Moses said that these women do receive right to inherit as if they were males, with conditions, of course, on how that should play out in the end. So there's a second example of ownership rights for women in the Bible. The third example that I'm going to give, here's Proverbs 31. It says that the woman considers a field and she buys it. Doesn't say anything about her husband being the comptroller. I'm sure that she would discuss these things, obviously, with her husband before she would go out on an endeavor. She's not totally a free agent. There's not an ownership relationship between a husband and a contractual wife. Ownership of people can only occur under two circumstances. That is when servitude and a master-servant relationship, and servitude is born or reckoned out of debt in the case of concubinage or even male servants. When a debt is incurred that cannot be paid, then someone has to, buy up that debt, that bad money, and then they take that person as a servant for 6 years, and in the 7th year he shall go free, and that has to do with the sabbatical cycle and a year of Jubilee. Okay. The only other example of a servant or ownership amongst people in the Bible was when a foreigner or a foreign came in and conquested the land. Then all of the people generally became tributaries to that king. So that in a sense there was ownership. The only sense of ownership that there is of a man over his wife or his family or his property is in the realm of threshold. A threshold is a border of interest that is placed there by Yah to every man. Even Yah had his own threshold. He had a curtain put up or a fence put up, and he said, you see to it that the children of Israel do not cross over this border. But only you shall come up to me, Moshe. See, this all has to do with landmarks, boundary markers, and threshold. And there is actually covenantal aspects to that. So the only sense of ownership there is a threshold. You know, if a thief comes in and steals, he violates threshold. If he comes in and commits adultery with your wife, then he violates threshold, your threshold, man. And that is a grievous offense. And he has not sinned against the woman as much as he sinned against man and against Yah. There is an order. And honestly, Christianity has taught people how to despise patriarchy, authority, male authority in particular. And the end of this, they're not going to be content until they have, deemed the penis an assault weapon and castrated literally every man so that their, Zardos society or whatever can then be brought into fruition. But anyway, it's ridiculous to say that women cannot own property because women have always been enfranchised with ownership of certain things, their dowries and things like that. That's money that belongs to them, property that belongs to them, slave girls and slave men, servants and whatnot. Those could all be incurred and owned by the woman. Abraham himself said of Hagar, you do what seems good in your sight, acknowledging the fact that that still was her servant more than it was his wife. You see, that is the proper protocol and balance that we need in this day. Now, the final example is the book of Ruth. In the book of Ruth, a piece of property came up through a deceased person, and that property was then to be redeemed. Okay? Now, the deal of that property was that Ruth was then made part and parcel to that property agreement. And that marriage to her and giving her children to raise up in a levirate marriage was part of the package, okay? The one who had the closest rights to redeem could not do it or would not do it, and therefore that passed to Boaz. And Boaz then produced children through her, which is where King David come from, and ultimately the Messiah. It all came through the proper handling and adjudication of property rights, which so property actually belonged to that woman. Okay? So anytime you get these, internet scholars are going to try to tell you or these cavemen who are overloaded with testosterone, and they want to, flex their muscles and all of that stuff theologically. You might want to consider going back into that book and realizing that there are a lot more things in that book besides your testosterone, but that there are actual legal procedures and protections for women. And one of those basic protections is for a woman to have the right to own property. Well, consider what I say, and have a good night. Shalom.